Hi, I'm Lhadon.
I'm Tendor.
And this is Our Nation, news and analysis on the state of Tibet. Welcome to episode 4 of season 2, and we've been off air for a little while. We're sorry about that. We've been busy with various campaigns and programs all over the world over the last 2 months. We'll talk about some of those today, but Tendor will get us started.
I'd like to start with the most recent incident of self-immolation. It's been this ongoing trend, and last Saturday, on July 7th, there was yet another self-immolation in Tibet, and it was Tsewang Dorjee, 22 years old, who set himself on fire against the Chinese government in protest of their rule, and it was in Damshung inside Tibet, and this just adds to the continuing trend and brings the total number to
43 self-immolations in Tibet since 2009, but really, I mean, 37 in the last year alone. 37 Tibetans in the last year alone, and in fact, 42 of the 43 immolations in Tibet have all occurred almost just over the last year. And it's shocking, it's horrifying. I don't know how to convey that, you know, when many of you may have had this experience when you're talking to people about the Tibetan issue, when they're inquiring about how things are. You know, some people have definitely heard about this trend of self-immolation inside Tibet, but many haven't. And when I, you know, recently was explaining to some people in a program I was in that this had all just happened mostly in the last year, they were floored. They were aghast that this is going on, that we're not hearing about it more in the world, that the governments aren't doing anything, that the Chinese government isn't responding. It doesn't bear thinking that this is...
It's a hard thing for people to just conceive.
Yeah.
And Tsewang Dorjee actually happens to be a nomad, a Tibetan nomad. And a little bit about this background as a nomad, I think is important because we have seen now a number of Tibetans who have self-immolated having come from nomadic backgrounds. And this says something about the way in which the Chinese government is repressing Tibetan society these days, and one of the major eradication of Tibetan culture is happening in the area of nomadic resettlement. And the Chinese government has been waging this relentless campaign to forcibly relocate Tibetan nomads. And they have admitted it themselves. You know, they have given out numbers by saying we are moving them into comfortable housing, but really what they are doing is moving Tibetans from nomadic pastures and grasslands, from their ancestral homelands, and putting them into concrete ghetto-style housing in the middle of nowhere in Tibet. And this is really aiming at the heart of Tibetan culture. No matter what the Chinese government says, this is an attack, this is an assault against the fundamental way of life of the Tibetan people. This is ethnocide. This is trying to eradicate the way of Tibetan nomadic life and their identity. This is like at the heart of Tibetan identity, and the nomads are the guardians of Tibetan culture. So this is something really serious happening inside Tibet, and what they are sending to the outside world as a message is, you know, how important it is to pay attention to the lifestyle of the nomads and the survival of the Tibetan nomads.
Yeah, and I think it's important just to not look at the self-immolations inside Tibet and not ask these questions. Why? Who are these people? Why are they doing this? And it's no coincidence, obviously, that this disproportionately high number of the young people or people who've self-immolated have been from nomadic families, and there are nomads. And the world needs to know about this, governments need to know. Many people do not know about the Chinese government's policy of trying to settle all Tibetan nomads in the next number of years. And you can learn more, you can educate yourself at nomadrights.org. Students for Free Tibet has this campaign, this initiative to bring this critical issue at the heart of Tibetan, sort of the survival of Tibet in large ways, you know, rests on this issue. And we're seeing it acutely right now in the self-immolations in Tibet. And people need to go to that website. There's ways to take action. It's not just a lost cause. We have to fight. We have no choice. The Drokpa people or the Tibetan nomads are resisting in their ways, and we have to support them from the outside.
And speaking of supporting Tibetans inside Tibet who are taking these incredible actions and continuing the resistance. One of the problems that we have been facing in recent times is in terms of amplifying the voices from Tibetans inside, and also whenever there is an incident, for example, whenever there is a self-immolation, how do we do our best to get it out to the world so that the entire world, millions of people around the world, hear about this and they know that the Chinese government is responsible. And there are a lot of people and organizations who are doing incredible work around this effort. At the same time, there has been a couple of times when our own people, out of a lack of experience, out of the best intentions, of course, but due to lack of experience and in a rush to release these news and images, sometimes people have posted these images on Facebook before they have been released in the news. This really drastically reduces the news value of the incident that is taking place inside Tibet. And this is something that we really want to be careful about and mindful of what to do if you or someone that you know receives something from Tibet that is an image or a news information, who to give it to and how to organize it. And if people need help with that, we are willing to help. We have these resources with which we can really get it out to the maximum impact and the maximum number of audiences. So please contact us. You can go to our website and call us directly on the phone. But this is something that we all have to be more careful about.
Yeah, absolutely, because Tibet is locked down and media is locked out. So for the international media to cover the story, to bring the largest possible spotlight and attention to the issue, they of course want and need images, and these are really invaluable tools for them to tell the story, the mainstream media. And like it or not, once that image has gone out just in our own networks, we may have some kind of satisfaction, or we may feel like, oh, now we understand what's happened, but is that really the most important thing? That's what we have to ask ourselves.
Right.
Or is it more important that the world sees and hears this story? Because we know what's happening, and we can wait a little bit, I think is the key.
Right.
We can wait, and the world must hear this, the words that understand and know the sacrifices that these incredible individuals are making.
And just so you know, I posted a video on YouTube a few days back speaking about this very issue, and you can actually find it on the SFT YouTube channel. So I encourage you to share it with other people and send it out to those who, for whom this information might be relevant.
Yeah, it's in Tibetan, so that will
Yeah.
go to the to the right audience. So now, in other news from Tibet, we have this incredible development that as Tibetans are lighting their bodies on fire, sacrificing their lives because the situation inside Tibet is so untenable for them, the Chinese government announces its plans for a theme park for a Tibetan town that they're going to build just a kilometer or two from Lhasa itself, from the capital city. It's a $4.8 billion project. They've already started construction, and this is I don't know. It just shows
ridiculous.
the total disconnect that the Chinese government has when it comes to the situation inside Tibet. On the one hand, Tibetans are giving their lives in this unbelievable act of dedication and courage and sacrifice for the cause of freedom. And the Chinese government, rather than deal with this, or any other government might take a long hard look at themselves and what were the reasons for this and what to do to be remotely sensitive in addressing the issues. But the Chinese government is building Disneyland next to Tibet, next to Lhasa. And they're saying that they will create a living museum for Tibetan culture. If you can imagine anything,
Where you can watch the uprising.
yeah, I mean it's the Chinese government is living in a different reality, and that's clear. I mean, where we are, where the rest of the world is, and where they are, they're two different places. And it's just their colonial rule in Tibet, I think, could be no better in this time summarized, juxtaposed, next to the story of self-immolation. with this story of their plans for this theme park.
And in a way, I think there are some cultural comparisons we can make to other places where a colonial power has tried to do these kinds of things, you know. And one of the things that, like, to me, you know, what comes to mind is like, is that a way in which the Chinese government is trying to trivialize the issue or trivialize the Tibetan people's identity, our history, and our culture, you know? And but the reality at the end is they are spending this much money, and in a way they're doing it as an offensive effort as much as a defensive effort, you know, because they're feeling that they're on the defensive now, because everybody knows, the whole world knows what the Chinese government is doing inside Tibet, and they feel this need to change the perspective or try to shift this perspective, and spending this much money, but at the same time the Tibetan people's struggle and the resistance is something that will not waver, you know. And in fact, I think these are the kinds of things that will only make Tibetan resistance stronger, if anything.
Yeah. It definitely doesn't inspire any kind of amusement for us, and I think the same will be true, of course, for Tibetans inside Tibet to watch such an eyesore and, you know, such an outrage being built at this incredibly difficult time. But I think also it says a lot about how Chinese view Tibet. You know, exactly. When they talk about tourism, bringing tourism up to 10 million people, the majority of tourists in Tibet are Chinese. They're not from anywhere else but China. And Tibet to them is, yeah, some kind of a playground. It is an amusement. It is an exotic, an exotic attraction. And Tibetans are just characters in this idea, this fantasy world, and you know, that's what the amusement park, that's what Disneyland is about.
But the Tibetans are serious, and one of the upcoming occasions, something that represents so much to the resistance of the Tibetan people and our freedom struggle, is actually going to be next year, on February 13th, 2013, will be the 100th anniversary of the moment in 1913 when His Holiness the 13th Dalai Lama declared the restoration of Tibetan independence. It was a couple of years after Tibet faced invading troops from the Manchu Empire, and His Holiness actually had to escape to exile in 1909, 1910, 11, and it was only in 1912 when the Manchu dynasty fell that the Dalai Lama was able to return to Tibet, and in 1913 His Holiness issued this Declaration of Tibetan Independence, proclamation, whatever you want to call it, but this historic document is something that we have been paying a lot of attention to and highlighting as a really important piece in our struggle. Yes. Something that could give us hope and sustenance to the resistance at this very difficult time. And in fact, there are many people and many groups in the last couple of years who have time and again met together and talked about the importance of highlighting the 100th anniversary of this declaration in 1913. And this here is a copy of a recreation of this declaration. And actually, Lhadon is holding in her hand a text of this declaration, and there are some. We would encourage everybody to read this text. It's on our website, and it's been translated into English, and it's available in Tibetan as well as in English, and everybody must read this text that was put out in 1913, because as a historical document, it is really precious to our struggle in terms of proving Tibet's independence in the past. But at the same time, there are certain points in this document that could also give us sort of a roadmap and inspiration to the future. So
we'll just read a little bit to inspire you to learn more and to read more. Tendor went to great effort with a number of our colleagues to recreate this important document and to sort of launch it in Dharamsala in May, and has been on the road. You can check out his Facebook to see all the places he is taking and has taken this incredible piece of history on tour to Tibetan communities, to the nation's capital in the United States. It will, he'll be traveling everywhere. But just quickly, we think that it's hard not to look at our own situation now in exile, and His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama's exile, and feel like this is, of course, a difficult time. This is just the worst it can be. This is a new thing for us on some level. But in fact, if you know Tibetan history, you know this is not the first time His Holiness the Dalai Lama has been in exile. The Great 13th, when he wrote this proclamation, or declaration, he said here, "A few years ago, the Chinese authorities in Sichuan and Yunnan endeavored to colonize our territory. They brought large numbers of troops into central Tibet on the pretext of policing the trademarks. I therefore left Lhasa with my ministers for the Indo-Tibetan border, hoping to clarify to the Manchu Emperor by wire that the existing relationship between Tibet and China had been that of patron and priest, and had not been based on the subordination of one to the other. There was no other choice for me but to cross the border, because Chinese troops were following with the intention of taking me dead or alive. On my arrival in India, I dispatched several telegrams to the emperor, but his reply to my demands was delayed by corrupt officials at Peking. Meanwhile, the Manchu Empire collapsed. The Tibetans were encouraged to expel the Chinese from central Tibet. I too returned safely to my rightful and sacred country, and I am now in the course of driving out the remnants of Chinese troops from Dokam in eastern Tibet. Now the Chinese intention of colonizing Tibet under the patron-priest relationship has faded like a rainbow in the sky. Having once again achieved for ourselves a period of happiness and peace, I have now allotted to all of you the following duties to be carried out without negligence." So I just think there's so much power, and there's so much that we need to understand and learn from our own history. A lot of people didn't even know about this document before, it has been sort of, attention has been drawn to it lately. And it is a critical piece of our history, but it's also just to put things in perspective for us to understand that this, this history, we've in a way been here before. And as the Manchu Empire ended and Tibetan rule in Tibet was reestablished, so too can it be again. And there's no reason why it can't be.
And if you go down and read number 3, 4, one of the things that His Holiness talks about is, one of the commands that he gives through this injunction is, make copies of this and put it in all the important places, all the places of intersections and gatherings, so that it may be seen by all Tibetans everywhere. And we can take this further and make sure that this is copied and pasted in all the places that Tibetans live in around the world, in front of the Chinese consulates and the embassies, or Times Square, Union Square. Like every city, every town has these gathering points, and we can distribute this to people, take it to the Capitol Hill or the Senate buildings, or state houses, and give it to your elected representatives, so that they can keep it in their office as a document. But there is so much that we can do with this, and in the future months we will be rolling out these initiatives so that everybody will have more clear instructions and materials and resources on how to push this forward.
And where are you going on your tour now? Where do you still?
Our next destination is going to be Portland. We have been to Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, Amherst, Vermont, Madison, Charlottesville, and Chicago, and basically, Portland is going to be next, and then some of the cities and towns in the West Coast.
San Francisco.
And also in India and in Canada, our networks in those countries will be traveling and doing tours, making these documents available to people everywhere. So it's exciting kind of moment. And speaking of moving forward, one of the exciting events and actions that have taken place recently is in Hong Kong. 2 weeks ago was the 15th anniversary of Hong Kong handover to China, and Hu Jintao, the Chinese president, was in Hong Kong to oversee those ceremonies. And for us, it was an opportunity to be in Hong Kong, to have our voices heard by the Chinese people in Hong Kong, by the Chinese authorities in Hong Kong, and we made sure that our members, particularly from SFT Taiwan, SFT Taiwan's leaders, Fong, Tenzin, and Xiaolong, they have been working for Tibet for a really long time, and they went to Hong Kong during that moment for 3-4 days in order to participate in those protests. And those protests in Hong Kong against Hu Jintao turned out to be one of the biggest protests that we have seen in Hong Kong. In memory, there were 400,000 people in the streets, and this was supposedly the leader of the Chinese nation, and Hong Kong being supposedly a part of China. But imagine almost 500,000 people in the streets of Hong Kong. All the traffic is blocked, and they were there not to welcome Hu Jintao. They were there to protest against Hu Jintao. And our activists from Taiwan, as well as other supporters in Hong Kong, some Tibetans as well, were there with Tibetan flags, with banners saying "Free Tibet, Free China," "Free Tibet, Free Hong Kong," and they were speaking to the media. So this was really such an exciting moment for us, because it was arguably one of the first times where we have had protesters, Free Tibet protesters in Hong Kong raising the Tibetan flag and not get arrested or thrown out or detained or something like that. So this was a really interesting moment that we wanted to quickly update you on.
And I think that of course we talked about this before, but when the situation inside Tibet is so dire and people inside are going through such a terrible time, we see people inside continuing to take action, continuing to engage in acts of resistance, preserving Tibetan language and culture, using it as a tool to resist Chinese government colonization, repression. And we also see so much going on in the outside world that is truly inspiring. What happened in Hong Kong, at the same time we had the UN Human Rights Council meeting last month in Geneva, and we had 2 SFT board members from France, Tenem and Gemso, Mingmar from Tibetan Youth Association of Europe, board member, Tsewang from Austria, and thanks to Tibet Network, we were able to get accreditation for these people to go inside to the Human Rights Council, meeting, and they were there as grassroots activists to meet, to pressure, to lobby, to talk to the various members of the Human Rights Council. They spoke to the Americans, the Canadians, the Germans, the Czechs, South Africans, Japanese, the Danes, the Swiss, and the Chinese, of course, all the while were going ballistic and trying to, rip their banner or take their flyers away and to yell at everybody that they were speaking to. ICT was there promoting their new genocide report. The Office of Tibet was there. So at every different level, Tibetans were represented inside this important meeting. Though we, don't get me wrong, we do not believe that the UN Human Rights Council is going to solve, fix, or intervene in the situation in Tibet in the way that we would like them to. But this is an important venue. This is an important place to meet the Chinese government, to meet their officials, to stand in front of the world and to speak the truth. This is part of our responsibility, we need to speak the truth and be a voice for Tibetans inside Tibet and amplify their voices and their actions wherever the Chinese government is operating, wherever they deem important. We must also be there.
To increase the discomfort factor for the Chinese government.
Absolutely. So there are many different sort of tactical approaches we have to take in this grand strategy to make the occupation of Tibet too costly for China to maintain. And right now, when they have so much power, it is hard for us to see sometimes that, any of these this one piece here or there will make the ultimate difference, but that's not the way it works. All of the pieces together, in, the long run, it'll take some time, but all of these pieces together will play their part. All of us have to play our part in the long-term final resolution for the Tibetan people, for the Tibetan struggle, for Tibetans to be free again. And so this is what this is all about. It's about upholding our history, taking action, creating history right now, not just in India, not just in Tibet and Nepal, but all over the world. And to be, we have to be this global force for the Tibetans outside of Tibet. And that's what we're trying to do. Tendor is doing his duty, SFT, the duty as decreed by the 13th Dalai Lama in spreading this proclamation. You can help. You can also draw attention through nomadrights.org and all of the things we've highlighted here, but we're really, it's important in these dark times to look at the light and look at the bright spots that the people and grassroots resistance brings to bear on this movement. And ultimately we are challenging the Chinese government. And our commitment and our strength and our courage, and certainly people inside Tibet, we will outlast this version of the Chinese, modern version of the Chinese empire.
And clearly, we feel really inspired by the way in which almost every Tibetan, almost every supporter out there is taking action at this time, no matter in what or whichever different ways, And as Lhadon said, right now, we may look at this as a really dark time in our history, a depressing time in our history. But if we really continue in the way in which we are working right now in all different fields, all different venues, whether it's the UN or in the street or on Capitol Hill or on online blogs, everywhere, if we really push this so that we raise the grand cost of occupying Tibet on the Chinese government, I think there is definitely going to be a time somewhere in the future where we will be able to look back at this moment and actually think of this not as a dark time, but the height of activism, the height of Tibetan history, the greatest time in Tibetan history.
So on that note, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you again sooner rather than later. This is Our Nation News and Analysis on the state of Tibet.